The razor hovered an inch above Ezra Holloway's left palm, and he was thinking about how a man's secrets always arrived in threes. In the chair in front of him sat Will Darcy, cattle buyer, married, never spoke of his wife at the saloon. Will had come in smelling of whiskey at 9 in the morning. He sat forward like a man with something to confess. His ears were red. His boots were caked in mud he had walked 2 miles to fetch, away from his own wagon, so no one would see. "Hold still," Ezra said. "I need to talk to someone," Will said. "Hold still and talk." Will Darcy closed his eyes. His voice came out in pieces, like a rifle stripped for cleaning. He had been skimming from the railroad's shipping manifest for 7 years. He had been helping himself to grain that was not his. He had done it because his brother had lost his place in the drought, and Will could not bear to watch it. Ezra did not raise his eyes from the blade. The razor moved along Will's jaw with a sound like a fingernail drawn across silk. "I'm not asking," Will said. "I'm telling." "I know," Ezra said. "Most people don't. That's why you're telling me." Will opened one eye. Ezra was looking at his work. There was no judgment in the man's face, and no pity, and that was the thing that made Will Darcy keep talking. "I have heard worse," Ezra said, "and quieter. Maybe they should hear me. Maybe there's a God who. Maybe there's just me." Will Darcy left with 20 cents less than he had walked in with. He had not been shaved since last autumn, and probably needed it now. He left with whatever weight he had brought in set down on the pine floor of the small shop on Main. Ezra swept up the hair. He wiped the chair. He wrote nothing down. He had a notebook on a shelf behind the door. He had not opened it in 18 years. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Put down whatever you're holding. Tell us, if you'd like, where you're listening from. We love knowing who is with us. There is a cold wind coming through these pages, and it is better for company. Now, back to the chair." Ezra Holloway had been cutting hair in this town for 31 years. He had come in with a borrowed saddle and a straight razor and a 17-year-old bride. He had buried the bride in 79. He had buried his daughter in 83, the year the cholera came upriver from the railhead. He had stayed. The town had been called Pine Station when he arrived. It had been called 4 other things since. Ezra did not need to know what they called it now. He had always thought of it as the place where he had spent most of his life being mistaken for furniture. A barber. A fixture. A man whose chair was so common no one thought to ask what he had seen in it. He was 58 years old. His hands had begun to shake by 4:30 in the afternoon. He wore reading glasses he had bought from a traveling peddler in 91 who had been, he now knew, even more of a thief than most peddlers. His wife had been gone longer than the glasses. The glasses outlasted almost everything. He had not remarried. He had been asked, kindly, by ladies at the church, and he had said, kindly, no. He had not explained why. He had only said that some silences are loud enough to live in. The shop had a single window facing east. The morning sun came through it and lay on the floor like a yellow rug. Most mornings Ezra watched it move. Most afternoons he watched it leave. The walls were paneled in old pine that had gone the color of weak tea, and there was a framed calendar from the Midland Grain Company 6 years out of date and a small certificate that read Master Barber in fancy script. In all that time, he had watched 3 sheriffs grow old. He had watched 4 doctors fade or fail. He had watched the Cattlemen's Association grow fat and the railroad's land agent move into a house too big for him, and the town lawyer build a brick office that covered half the block. He had watched Harlan Beckwith raise himself from a drover with 1 good horse to a county commissioner with 6,000 acres. He had watched all of it, from a wooden chair with a white apron. The thing about a barber's chair, Ezra used to think while he was lathering someone's neck, is that it is the only piece of furniture in town where a man leans back and forgets how to be afraid. A man sits in it and feels the warmth of the hot towel on his face, and his mouth comes open. He speaks like a child to a mother. He speaks like a sinner to a priest. He tells the truth in this chair because the chair is shaped like a kind of permission. Even the bad men. Especially the bad men. Because the bad men are the ones who need to say out loud that they are bad. They need it confirmed. Ezra was, in his way, a witness to a town none of the rest of them knew. On a Tuesday in late September of 1893, a young woman came into the shop with red eyes and dirt on her cuffs and a black bonnet that had been her mother's. Her name was Clara Whitfield. Her husband had been dead 9 weeks. He had fallen from a hayloft. Some men at the livery had laughed about it. Some men laughed at most things. "How can I help you?" Ezra said. She said, "I need a trim." Before my husband is in the ground properly, I cannot go to him looking like this. The husband was already in the ground. She knew that. She meant the headstone. The marble man had asked her to come in. He had said, "Mrs. Whitfield, the lettering is set for Friday. I want the date right." He did not say, "I want you to look right." He had not needed to. Ezra sat her in the chair. He unfolded a fresh towel. He poured warm water into the basin. "You don't have to talk," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. He did not raise his eyes. He cut. She spoke. Her husband had inherited a quarter section of good bottom land from her father-in-law. 80 acres along the river, a quilt of hay meadow, a stand of cottonwoods. The title had been clear for 2 generations. The county records had the signatures and the seals. Then Harlan Beckwith had bought the land off his clerk. He had paid, by Clara's reckoning, $28. And the land had vanished off her husband's name and onto Beckwith's name. The deed was filed in May. Her husband had died in August, with nothing in his pocket but a handkerchief and a Bible. He did not know, Clara said. He never found out. He was up on the hayloft fixing the winch when. She did not finish. Ezra finished the trim. He did not react. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "I want you to know that I'm sorry." He had not said that to many people. He had said it once about his wife. He had said it once about his daughter. He had nothing left for it in his mouth except the one true use of it. "What happened to you?" Ezra said, "has happened to at least 4 other families in this county." Clara looked at him in the mirror. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because I have been in this chair," he said, "since before your husband was born." Across Main Street, in the brick office with the green awning, Harlan Beckwith sat at his desk and signed papers. He signed cattle bills. He signed shipping receipts. He signed his name on a deed for 40 acres along the river that had belonged to a Norwegian homesteader who had died of consumption in March, with no heirs, except a sister in Iowa who had received a single letter telling her she had nothing. Beckwith did not think of himself as a thief. He thought of himself as a man who could see what other men could not see. He could see the shape of property. He could see where the lines fell when the surveyors were drunk or careless. He could see the heir who would not come home, the widow who would not write to the land office, the old man whose hand shook too much to defend a signature. He could see, most of all, who would not speak. He had signed his first fraudulent deed at the age of 23. He had done it because his father had done it before him. His father had done it because his father had done it before him. He had a wife. He had 2 married daughters. He had a pew at the church on Sundays. He had a Bible on his desk that he opened when his wife came to call so that she would think he was a man of thought. He had not been inside Ezra Holloway's shop in 15 years. He did not think of Ezra Holloway at all. That same week, on a Thursday morning, Ezra sat alone at the back of his shop and unlocked the drawer. Inside the drawer was a small notebook in brown leather. The cover was cracked. The pages were soft at the corners. The first entry was dated April of 1862. He had kept it the way a man keeps a diary he never intends to show. He had kept it for himself. He had written, in his careful longhand, for he had taught himself penmanship from a copybook given to him by a schoolmarm in 72, every name, every date, every deed number, every confession that had been made beneath his hands. There were 417 entries. Some were small. A man had said he had kissed another man's wife. A woman had said she had forged her brother's signature to get a loan. A boy of 17 had said he had stolen a horse in 79 and no one had ever caught him. Some were not small. There was the name of the surveyor who had marked off the wrong line for Beckwith's first big purchase. There was the name of the county clerk who had stamped the seal on the wrong deed. There was the name of the man who had carried the cash in a saddlebag from the railhead and who had split it 3 ways under the cottonwoods by moonlight. There was the name of the man who had died of poison whiskey in 88, and the name of the man who had bought that whiskey, and the name of the man who had set the bottle outside the man's door. There was, in short, every quiet piece of what Harlan Beckwith had built. Ezra had known that he was keeping it. He had known it for 30 years. He had not planned to use it. He had planned to die with it. He had thought the silence was its own mercy. On this Thursday morning, with Clara Whitfield's face still in his memory, Ezra shut the drawer again. Then he opened it. He took out the notebook. He carried it down to the bank. He did not go to the sheriff. He knew the sheriff had taken a sack of corn from Beckwith in 91, in a year when the corn harvest had failed. He went to a man he had not spoken to in 4 years. The man's name was Thomas Talbot. He was the new territorial judge, just arrived from Kansas City, just moved into the little house at the end of Pine Street. He had a wife and 2 boys. He had not yet been offered a corner office at the brick building with the green awning. He had not yet been bought. Ezra sat down in the judge's parlor. The judge was drinking tea. The judge looked tired. Ezra said, "Judge, I want to give you something." The judge said, "What is it?" "A record," Ezra said, "of every fraudulent transaction that has passed through the county land office between the years of 1862 and 1893. The judge did not speak. "You can do with it what you will," Ezra said. "If you want a witness, I will come. If you want me to die quiet, I will die quiet. But I cannot watch another widow sit in my chair and tell me what was taken from her." The judge said, "You understand what you are doing." Ezra said, "I had a daughter once. I lost her because a doctor in this town would not treat her until I had paid him. By the time I had what he wanted, she was gone. I have carried that debt for 9 years. I do not think it can ever be paid back, but I can stop it from happening to someone else." The judge set down his tea. It was a Wednesday in October. "Pause with me, here, in this parlor. Look at this quiet old barber. He has held the town's secrets for 30 years. He has done it because nobody else would. Now the question must be answered, not by him, but by us. What would you do? If you had carried this weight alone, would you set it down? Or would you keep walking with it, as he had, because you could not bear to drop it onto someone else?" On the Friday morning that followed, 2 deputies rode out from town. They did not ride toward the brick office with the green awning. They rode toward a small farmhouse 2 miles east of Pine Station, where Ezra Holloway lived alone and kept chickens and read the same Bible every night. The deputies sat on the porch with their hats in their hands. The oldest of them, a man named Rourke, who had been shaving since he was 15 and had never once in that time spoken a word about anyone he had seen, looked at Ezra. "Harlan Beckwith knows," Rourke said. "I figured he would," Ezra said. "He sent word last night," Rourke said, "to a man from Abilene, to a man who has done work for him before." Ezra poured the deputies coffee. He set out a plate of bread. He did not stand up. "I'll sit," he said. "I'll finish the coffee." Rourke said, "You could ride." Ezra said, "Son, I have ridden. I have ridden since I was 14. I am 58 years old and a barber, and I do not care to run." Rourke said, "You cannot hold them off." Ezra said, "I don't aim to." He did not sleep that night. He sat on his porch with a quilt around his shoulders and the notebook in his lap. He relit his lantern twice. He did not open the notebook. He knew every word by heart. The man from Abilene came on Sunday. He came at dawn. He crossed the yard. He stepped up on the porch. He was a tall, soft-looking man with a small leather bag. He did not ask anyone's name. He did not pull a weapon. He sat down in the empty rocking chair beside Ezra and poured 2 cups from the jug of whiskey he had brought. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I have a letter." Ezra said, "Read it." The man handed it over. It was written in Harlan Beckwith's hand. It was 1 sentence. It said, "Burn the book and live." Ezra folded it. He put it in his pocket. He looked at the man from Abilene. "Tell Mr. Beckwith," he said. "Tell him I have carried this town in my hands for 30 years. Tell him I will not put it down now." The man from Abilene lifted his cup. He drank. He wiped his mouth. He said, "Mr. Holloway, I am paid to deliver an outcome, not a message." Then he drew the knife. And here, with the cold of the morning coming through the porch slats, the storm arrived. Ezra did not try to fight. He had never been the kind of man who fought. He had always been the kind of man who waited. He raised his left arm, which was the arm that held the notebook tucked under the quilt. The man from Abilene went for the arm. The blade bit through the sleeve and through the skin and into the leather back of the book. Ezra did not cry out. He said, in a voice as quiet as he had used every day of his life, "You have not got it." The man from Abilene pulled the book from under the quilt. He opened it. He saw that the pages had been cut out. They had been replaced by blank paper. The words were not here. They were at the judge's house. The man from Abilene looked at Ezra. He said, "Where are they?" Ezra said, "Where they need to be." The man from Abilene put away the knife. He sat a moment. He stood. He walked back across the yard. He mounted his horse. He did not say goodbye. He was in town by noon. He did not go to the brick office. He went out the south road. He did not come back. In the weeks that followed, Ezra did not return to the shop. He sat in his chair on the porch. He read. He slept. He let Rourke bring him the news. The judge had issued a warrant on a Tuesday. The Cattlemen's Association had met on a Wednesday. They had denied everything. They had called it a witch hunt. The judge had not flinched. He had a small printing press in his office. He had, on a Thursday, issued a printed pamphlet with a list of every fraudulent transaction, every forged deed, every dollar taken. He had sent it, by post and by messenger, to every county clerk in 3 territories, to the governor's office, to the railroad, to the territorial newspapers. Harlan Beckwith had been arrested on a Saturday. He had been taken, quietly, in his shirt sleeves, in front of his wife, from the front porch of his brick office. He had not resisted. He had said, "This is a misunderstanding." He had said, "This will be cleared up." It had not been cleared up. On a Monday, the land office clerk had broken. He had signed a confession. He had named the surveyor who had been paid. The surveyor, when the deputies went out to his place, was hanging from a beam in his barn. The note on the beam said, "I cannot live with this." On a Tuesday, the grain buyer Will Darcy had come to the judge on his own. He had brought his ledger. He had said, "I am a thief too. You should know. I have been a thief for 7 years. I would like to make it right." The judge had put him on a list. He had not thrown him in jail. If this story has moved you tonight, you are exactly the person we wrote it for. There is a kind of justice in the world that the loudest voices cannot manufacture. It takes the quiet ones to make it real. A like and a subscribe tells us we should keep returning to the chairs they don't talk about. Keep returning to the lives that were never supposed to matter. We mean to keep telling them. Now, back to Ezra. In late November, with the first snow on the cottonwoods, the judge came out to the farmhouse. He brought his wife. She brought a quilt she had been sewing. She set it on the porch rail. He brought a piece of paper with a stamp on it. The judge said, "Mr. Holloway." "Yes," Ezra said. "The land along the river," the judge said. "The 80 acres that were stolen from the Whitfield widow. The deed has been returned. The seal is proper. The recording is clean." Ezra did not speak. The judge said, "Mrs. Whitfield is back on the place. Her hired man is fixing the barn. The cattle are sold. The mortgage is paid. There is a small balance owed to the railroad for freight, and that is being settled by certain friends of the judge." Ezra said, "Good." The judge said, "There is also this." He set the stamped paper down. It was a deed. It was for the quarter section of homestead land along the East Fork, where Ezra had been squatting, more or less, since his wife had died. It was grant land. It had been in the running for 30 years. The judge said, "Your name has been on this. It has been on this since '85. The land office never processed it. I have processed it." Ezra looked at the deed. The paper was white. The signature was not his. The land office clerk had refused. The judge had done it himself. The judge said, "You have a place, Ezra. You have a place that is yours." Ezra held the deed in both hands. He folded it. He put it in his shirt pocket, against his chest. He said, "The man from Abilene." The judge said yes. Ezra said, "I would like to know if he ever made it home." The judge said, "I have word he did." Ezra nodded. He said, "That is good. That is good." The judge's wife came out on the porch. She set a cup of broth on the arm of his chair. She said, "Mr. Holloway, you are not supposed to be out here alone." Ezra said, "Ma'am, I have been alone for a long time. I have just been in different kinds of alone. This kind is better." She smoothed the quilt she had brought for him. She had embroidered his initials in the corner. E.H. He noticed, after she had gone, that the embroidery was the same careful pattern his wife had used to do on his shaving aprons. He folded the blanket over his knees. He lifted his cup of broth. He thought of every customer who had sat in his chair. He thought of the banker's son who had wept. He thought of the cattle buyer who had confessed. He thought of the sheriff's wife who had come in '89, with her hair cut short and her eyes bruised, and who had not said a word, but who had touched his hand when he had steadied her at the door. He had not been furniture. He had been a witness. He had been the only witness that mattered. He died on a Wednesday, in February, of the year after. He had been sitting on the porch. The judge had been with him. The judge had been reading him the latest pamphlet from the territorial prosecutor, who had decided to pursue the matter further up the chain. He had smiled. He had said, "I should like to have seen Beckwith's face when the warrant was read." He had coughed. He had closed his eyes. Rourke had been at the foot of the porch. He had gone inside. He had come back with a fresh cup of broth. He had set it down. Ezra did not open his eyes again. The notebook had not been in the house. It had been, as he had said, exactly where it needed to be. It was being used, in the months after his death, in a long trial in the next county over. It was being used to bring down not one man, but 7. Rourke was the one who picked out the suit. It was the only suit Ezra had ever owned. It had been his daughter's wedding dress in '83. He had never worn it. The wedding had not happened. He was buried in the small cemetery on the hill. The judge spoke. The Cattlemen's Association sent a wreath, which was a small humiliation they had to live with. The widow Clara Whitfield sent peonies from her own garden. The sheriff's wife sent the blue bonnet she had been wearing when she had first come to the chair. The town came. They came without being asked. The shop stayed empty through the spring. In late summer, on the first warm Saturday, a young woman unlocked the door. She was not from the town. She was from down the rail line. She had read of the trial in the paper. She had come because she had been a barber's daughter, once, in another town, and she had thought she might carry on something. She polished the floor. She set out the basin. She set the chair in its place. She put the framed certificate back on the wall. She pinned, in the corner of the big mirror, a single piece of brown paper. On it, in careful longhand, was written, "For Ezra," who held what was told to him, and kept it, and set it down at the right time. A child came in the next morning. He was 6. He had never been in the shop. He sat in the chair. He looked at himself in the mirror. He said, "This is taller than I thought I'd be." She laughed. She said, "Hold still, sweetheart." She lifted her razor. She began. "Next time, we'll tell you the story of a woman who inherited a station on the long line in '94 with nothing but the telegraph key and a habit of listening between the messages, and the man who came down the tracks one night, carrying a letter sealed 42 years before. We hope you'll be back for it. Until then, pull the chair a little closer. Drink something warm. Someone, somewhere, just set down something heavy.